Hey guys, Pastor Ariel here. I'm super excited to talk to you today because I know one of the things that's important is for you to understand that the growth of your church is actually directly connected to your growth. That's right. The growth of your church is directly connected to your growth. And so what that simply means is that if you want to grow the ministry, you've got to begin by growing yourself. And this really hit me a couple of years ago. I was at a conference. Um, I was overseeing our production and media at a church. I was overseeing teams and had volunteers, and I was doing an okay job. I was doing an okay job. And part of the reason why I was doing an okay job is because I was doing what I knew to do. I was doing the best that I could based on what I knew. And I realized in that moment that as I'm sitting in this conference, I'm listening to these speakers and they're talking about, growing and investing in themselves. And I realized, man, here's the thing that's key. As God pours into me and as I pour into myself, I give God the tools and resources that He can utilize in my life to pour into others. Right? In other words, God is pouring stuff into me so I can then be poured out. And so this was, in essence, one of the key components of this idea of, well, how do I get to this place of growth? Like, how do I make sure that we're growing and that, I'm growing as a leader? And I began to learn this concept or this idea of making sure that I was investing in myself. And it's fascinating because there are specifically three areas that I want to just challenge you in as a leader. Because if you're leading anything, you've got to remember the growth of the organization, the growth of the church, the growth of the ministry you are leading is directly connected to your growth. Because either you become the accelerator for growth, you become the reason that the ministry is growing. You kind of, as God is speaking to you, you're then pouring into people and you're speaking to them and exciting and leading, or you become the lid. And so every time there's a challenge or an opportunity for growth, you become the reason why there is no growth, or you become, hey, we can only grow so much. And it's not connected to your circumstances, and it's not connected to how much budget you have, how many people you have. All of those things are outside resources that can change. But the one thing that will always stay the same is you. And you are the lid or the accelerant of the growth of your church. So when I came to this realization, I said, hey, I have got to be committed to growing myself, right? And so there's three specific areas that I want to challenge you that I had to and still continue to work on growing myself in. Number one, obviously, is I want to grow in my faith, right? And I love this. James 4:8 says this. It says, draw near to God and He will draw near to you. And so, in other words, there is a responsibility that I have to make sure that I am spending time with God, that I am investing in myself, that I am drawing near to God, that I am growing in my faith. Because if I can grow in my faith, all of a sudden, now I find myself in a position where I am believing God for more, and God is able to utilize me for more. And now I become I don't become a limit anymore, but I become a conduit that God utilizes. Why? Because my faith, my ability to believe Him has grown. My ability to utilize and apply spiritual principles into my day-to-day leadership grows as I get to know His Word and spend time, and I get to see even leadership in the context of the Bible. Leaders like Moses and Joshua. These are individuals that, as I'm studying some of the prophets and I'm reading and I'm studying and I'm learning principles, Nehemiah, I'm learning these principles and I'm able to now apply it to my day-to-day leadership. So as my faith grows, so does my ability to lead and to grow the ministry. Another area where growth is important is growing in how you think. Right? My the way I process things, the way I take a view, how I look at things. In fact, Romans 12:2 says that I no longer need to conform myself to the pattern of the world, but to be transformed by the renewing of my mind. right? So in other words, on a regular basis, how I think needs to change, because how I think impacts what I believe, and that impacts how I behave. And so if I want to change my results, it doesn't start with maybe bringing in someone new or adding more budget to something. It changes with changing me and changing how I think, how I view things. Because I can look at the same situation and see it as an opposition, a challenge, or I can see it as an opportunity, right? But it all depends on how I think. And so if I want to be able to grow, I've got to be able to stretch myself in my thinking. And this is where having coaches or having people around you who help you see things, you might be looking at the same thing, but because now you've got an influencer, someone who can speak into you, you're able to now see it from a different perspective. And that, as a result, leads us to a place that we want to grow, right? We want to grow. And so growth is crucial. Growth helps us to get to a place where we're like, man, I'm thinking differently. I'm viewing things differently, and as a result, I'm growing as a leader, right? And so this is where, and so this is where being able to grow as a leader is directly connected to my growth, right? I'm growing, and so as a result, God gives me opportunities to grow. And so how I think has to change, how I apply principles, how I apply, insights that are in scripture to govern how I make decisions. All of those things are connected to my growth. And so number one, if we're going to grow, we got to grow in our faith. Number two, we've got to grow in the way we think, right? Renew our minds. But number three, the third thing we've got to do is we've got to be able to grow in our relationships, right? Grow in our connections with other people. And one of my favorite verses, Proverbs 27:17, says that as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another, right? And so scripture reminds us that, if we've got right relationships and right people around us, those relationships actually set us up for success. They accelerate us. But then if we've got wrong relationships, they keep us behind. And I remember one time where I was having a conversation with this young man, and he was frustrated because of some circumstance, and he was saying to me, man, I can't believe that this thing happened. And apparently he was having a conversation with someone. That person, took what he said out of context, took it wrong, and then went back to, someone else. And it became this big, session. And I remember saying to this young man, hey man, you've got to understand something. You cannot shepherd talk with sheep, right? You can't have shepherd talk with sheep. What do I mean by that? If you're a shepherd overseeing people, if you're a leader, you're leading in some capacity, there are certain things that people that are being led will never understand because they're being led and they're not doing the leading, right? If you're a shepherd over a congregation, there are some aspects of leading that people in the congregation can't understand, which is why it's important to have shepherd talk with other shepherds, right? Be surrounded by people who are able to understand, challenge you, get you to see things from a different perspective, because you're both on the same level or you're on similar levels. You have similar understandings. And so this is where having community and relationships with individuals is so important, right? So 3 quick ways we just went over growing. Number 1 is growing in your faith, right? You want to make sure you're stretching your faith. Number 2, growing in how you think, right? We can't take the old mindset, the old ways of leading things into these new challenges. Number 3, growing in our relationships. God didn't wire us to do ministry by ourselves. And so here's what I kind of want you to do. I want you to be able to take a decision and say, hey, today I am making a decision that I will invest and grow myself, right? I will invest and grow myself. Why? Because as you grow yourself, as you grow as a leader, right, it's not just for your growth, but it impacts the growth of the ministry, impacts the growth of the church. All right, that's it for now. Thanks for hanging with me. God bless. We'll be talking soon.